Today we'll be working in my workbook called David from Anointed to Fugitive. This covers 1 Samuel 16 through 20 and Psalm 59 because, of course, David wrote most of the Psalms. So many of the Psalms we can relate to where he is in his life. Looking at the table of contents, we have already completed the first four chapters. First four chapters. Okay. No, it's first three chapters. I think we completed the first three chapters. I remember David and Goliath. I don't remember teaching about Saul become jealous of David. So I'm going to look at chapter 4, see if I have done that. I don't recall this, so this is what we're going to do. All right. Saul becomes jealous of David. 1 Samuel 18, 1 through 30. Saul took him, David, that day and would not let him go home to his father's house any more. So David went out wherever Saul sent him and behaved wisely. And Saul set him over the men of war, and he was accepted in the sight of all the people, and also in the sight of Saul's servants. Now, instead of calling on David occasionally to play music for him, Saul now keeps David with him. And David, remember, he's not yet 20, and yet he's put in charge of various men of war. What had just happened that day to increase Saul's desire for David? He had killed Goliath. What town was his father's home? Bethlehem. Did David behave wisely or foolishly? Wisely. Saul put him in charge of a special group of fighting men. What were they called? Men of war. Even though he was still a boy and not yet of fighting age, he was still accepted by white groups of people. All the people and also Saul's servants. Okay. My answers just in case I get thrown here. Now, when he had finished speaking to Saul, the soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. Then Jonathan and David made a covenant, because he loved him as his own soul. And Jonathan took off the robe that was on him and gave it to David with his armor, even to his sword and his bow and his belt. So what is the age difference between David and Jonathan? We can easily determine that there is a minimum of 5 years difference, as Jonathan is already a soldier, minimum age of 20, and David is only 15. However, we have already seen Jonathan in battle for a number of years, starting in 1 Samuel 14. So there's probably a 10-year difference in age between Jonathan and David. Which one is King Saul's son, David or Jonathan? Jonathan. Which one is anointed as the future king? David. What 5 things did Jonathan give David? The robe, his armor, his sword, his bow, and his belt. As the oldest son of King Saul, Jonathan would be in line to be king. In David, Jonathan sees a kindred spirit. Like David, Jonathan battled without fear, knowing God was with him in 1 Samuel 14. And like David, Jonathan had strong faith in God. Jonathan sees better than anyone else the Spirit of God inside David, and his transfer of armor symbolizes this. The scriptures continue. Now it happened as they were coming home, when David was returning from the slaughter of the Philistine, that the women had come out of all the cities of Israel, singing and dancing to meet King Saul with tambourines, with joy, and with musical instruments. So the women sang as they danced and said, Saul has slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s. Who came out to meet the returning soldiers? The women came out. How can you tell the women were happy? They're singing and dancing. What did they sing? Saul has slain thousands and David his 10,000s. What they sang was untrue. David had only killed Goliath. So why do you think they sang these phrases? Because David is mightier in their eyes than Saul is. He is a young man, yet he killed Goliath. Then Saul was very angry, and the saying displeased him, and he said, they have ascribed to David 10,000s, and to me they've ascribed only thousands. Now what more can he have but the kingdom? So Saul eyed David from that day forward. When Saul says, what more can he have but the kingdom? Saul may have remembered why he was picked as a king. The people wanted a king to lead them in battle and be their hero. He may also have remembered what he promised anyone who beat Goliath in battle, which was that the king would enrich them with great riches, would give him his daughter, and give his father's house exemption from taxes in Israel. Why was Saul angry? Because people were paying more attention to David than they were to him. Why had the people wanted a king? Because they wanted someone to lead them. Who is the better leader in battle now, David or King Saul? David. What was promised anyone who beat Goliath? Um, Great riches, a king's daughter in marriage, and his father's house exemption from taxes. Who is more popular at this moment, David or King Saul? David is. As it happened on the next day that the distressing spirit from God came upon Saul, and he prophesied inside the house. So David played music with his hand as at other times, but there was a spear and sword's hand in Saul's hand, and Saul cast the spear, for he said, I will pin David to the wall. But David escaped his presence twice. Now, a distressing spirit may not come directly from the Lord, but was permitted by the Lord. Let's remember that. The scripture says that King Saul prophesied while under the distressing spirit. Would what he have said come from God? More than likely not. More than likely not. So, hmm, anyway, what was in King Saul's hand when David played music? Um, a spear. Who did King Saul throw the spear at? David. How many times did King Saul throw the spear at David? More than once. David had originally been brought to the palace to play music so that King Saul's spirit would be soothed. Does it look like it's still working? No, not. It doesn't seem to be working. Who do you think protected David from being pinned to the wall? Well, God. Now Saul was afraid of David because the Lord was with him, but had departed from Saul. Therefore Saul removed him from his presence and made him his captain over 1,000. And he went out and came in before the people. And David behaved wisely in all his ways, and the Lord was with him. Therefore, when Saul saw that he behaved very wisely, he was afraid of him. But all Israel and Judah loved David because he went out and came in before them. Why was Saul afraid of David? Because the Lord was with him. What did King Saul appoint David as? A captain over 1,000 men. Did David complain at being sent out into battle? No. David behaved wisely in all his ways, and the Lord was with him. Is there any evidence that King Saul gave the reward of killing Goliath to David? No, don't see any evidence of that. In sending David into battle, what would King Saul have hoped to happen? That David would be killed. Instead of being killed, however, David and his troops of 1,000 soldiers went to many battles, returning as victors. Did David's popularity grow during this time? Yes, indeed it did. Then Saul said to David, here's my older daughter, Merab. I will give her to you as a wife. Only be valiant for me and fight the Lord's battles. For Saul thought, let my hand not be against him, but let the hand of the Philistines be against him. So David said to Saul, who am I, and what is my life for my father's family in Israel that I should be son-in-law to the king? But it happened at that time when Merab, Saul's daughter, should have been given to David, that she was given to Adriel, the Maholite, as a wife. Maholathite. Right. Finally, we see King Saul following through with one of the rewards for killing Goliath. What or who did King Saul offer to David? He offered Merab, his oldest daughter. Does King Saul add another condition in marrying his eldest daughter? Yes. If so, fight the Lord's battles and be valiant. Does David accept Merab as his wife? No, because he's not worthy to be son-in-law to the king. David did not see his family as equal to that of King Saul to merit being son-in-law of the king. Who did Merab marry? Adriel. King Saul is trying and will continue to try to get David frustrated, and they're both fall into the sin of anger. So far, King Saul has done the following: thrown a sword at David twice, refused to reward David for killing Goliath. C, offer his daughter only to take her away. Now, Michal, Saul's daughter, loved David, and they told Saul, and the thing pleased him. So Saul said, I will give her to him, that she may be a snare to him, and that the hand of the Philistines may be against him. Therefore Saul said to David a second time, You shall be my son-in-law today. And Saul commanded his servants, Communicate with David secretly and say, Look, the king has delight in you, and all his servants love you. Now therefore become the king's son-in-law. So Saul's servants spoke these words in hearing of David, and David said, Does it seem to you a light thing to be a king's son-in-law, seeing I'm a poor and lightly esteemed man? And the servants of Saul told him, saying, Is this in this manner David spoke? Then Saul said, Thus you shall say to David, The king does not desire any dowry, but proof of 100 circumcisions of the Philistines to take vengeance on the king's enemies. But Saul thought to make David fall by the hand of the Philistines. So he's putting a huge dowry price on Michal. During this time, it was the man who paid a dowry to the woman's family in order to marry her. This dowry was supposed to replace all the cooking and cleaning the woman did in her family's household. Which of King Saul's daughters was in love with David and wanted to marry him? Michal. Why was the concept of David marrying Michal a good idea in King Saul's mind? It would distract him and maybe be a distraction during war. Who normally provided the dowry during this period of time, the man or the woman? The man did. Was David rich enough to provide a dowry to marry the daughter of a king? No, he wasn't. What did King Saul ask for instead of a traditional dowry? 100 circumcisions of the Philistines. What was the true intent of King Saul in asking this kind of dowry? To hopefully that David will fall in the hand of the Philistines. And when 100 circumcisions is a lot. So when his servants told David these words, it pleased David well to become the king's son-in-law. Now the days had not expired. Therefore David arose and went, and he and his men, and killed 200 men of the Philistines. And David brought proof of their circumcisions, and they gave them in full count to the king, that he might become the king's son-in-law. Then Saul gave him Michal, his daughter, as a wife. The days had not expired means that there was time limit to this deal. King Saul's request, complete with a time limit, should have been an impossible request. Yet was David willing to accept the unique dowry request? Yes, indeed he was. How many proof of circumcisions did King Saul ask for? 100. How many proof of circumcisions did David bring the king? 200. Did King Saul follow through with giving his daughter Michal to David as his wife? Yes, he did. Thus Saul saw and knew that the Lord was with David, and that Michal, Saul's daughter, loved him. And Saul was still more afraid of David. So Saul became David's enemy continually. Then the princes of the Philistines went out to war. And so it was, wherever they went out, that David behaved more wisely than all the servants of Saul, so that his name became highly esteemed. Despite King Saul's repeated attempts to bring David down, David excels. How has David grown in power since killing Goliath? He's been captain to 1,000 soldiers, winning victory after victory. He and Jonathan, King Saul's son, become strong friends. All of Israel and Judah love David. He is married to Michal, King Saul's daughter. So that's the end of this chapter. Let's see if we can do the crossword. I always like to have the answers in front of me, just in case I screw up. I want to lead you astray. Okay, number 4. Who is Saul's oldest daughter? Merab. Number 5, what did Saul throw at David? A spear. Number 6, what daughter of Saul loved David? Michal. Number 7, David and his Philistines killed 200 Philistines to marry Michal. One down. How many times did David escape being pinned to the wall by Saul's spear? 2. Twice. Okay, twice. Who made a covenant with David? Jonathan. Saul has slain his thousands and David his 10,000s. All righty? So that's the end of this chapter. I hope you enjoyed it.